start off with, I have Tyler Mitchell with me, who's the president of Snowfly.com, or Snowfly actually, and myself, Paul Hebert, managing director at I2I. That's my Twitter handle there, IncentIntel, if you want to send me a note. But anyway, what we're going to just talk about today is this idea that incentives that maybe you can't count on are actually the incentives that will drive behavior within an organization. And I guess the best example of that I can bring to the fore is the lottery. Now, I don't know about you, but a few weeks ago, I think it was like August 15th, the lottery was $305 million. And I don't normally play the lottery, but I played that day, and a lot of other people did. And, you know, in some cases, they can overload the machines when the lottery number gets up that high. But if you think about the lottery, and we all do it, if you think about the lottery, the odds of winning are ridiculously low. And I don't even think we know, you know, when we think about that in perspective, what those odds mean. But the odds are 1 in 175 million, almost 176 million. But we keep playing. Every week, people play. And if you think about those odds, there are a lot of other things that you have better odds of, but yet we still play. Now think about this for a minute. You only have the odds of getting a hole in one are only 5,000 to 1. That's pretty darn good. You play, you know, a lot of people play 5,000 rounds of golf or 5,000 holes of golf. So getting a hole in one is not that rare if you think about it in terms of the lottery. Or even, how about this one? An asteroid apocalypse is only 12,000 to 1. We don't, you know, we don't run out every week and buy duct tape and bottled water. Or getting struck by lightning. This is the one everybody throws up there. It's about 500,000 to 1. And then you've got winning a gold medal, and that's just coming off the Olympics. I thought that was an interesting one in there. That's about 600,000 to 1. And with the presidential elections coming up, you have about a 10 million in 1 chance of being president. But yet that 175 million to 1 odds still gets our attention. And the last one, this one cracked me up as I was putting together the proposal with this presentation with Tyler, that death by vending machine. And the odds of that happening are 112 million to 1, which are pretty slim, but yet we're not afraid of vending machines. Now keep that vending machine in the back of your mind. It's going to come back up again later on in the talk here today. But so we like play games. We look at risk, and we like that randomness around us. And when we don't know the outcome, that actually gets us all excited. And I think the lottery example shows that. Now, if you think about it, though, from an incentive standpoint, incentive programs have traditionally been the programs that we participated in every time in business that had an outcome attached to them. But they were always an outcome that we kind of understood was going to be there. And we tried to package them, I think, as games as we were putting these together. At least I did when I was coming up in the industry. And, you know, games is now hot on the market. And I think when we talk about incentives you can't count on, gamification comes to mind. And gamification is hot. It's the hottest thing going right now when it comes to engagement, whether that we're talking about the consumer or employee. I mean, everybody wants to gamify everything anymore. In fact, there's a tool out there called Google Insights, which lets you kind of see what's hot, what's being searched for on the internet. And the term gamification actually had almost 0 searches up until the end of 2010. And now it's a huge search term out there on the market. And, you know, the gamification thing is just rolling hot. And now I don't know whether it's jumping the shark now or not, but here's the deal with gamification and this whole randomization of business is that we are applying these game techniques and game thinking and game mechanics into almost everything we're doing that. And that encourages everybody to play games. And the reason it works is because we have a psychological predisposition to engage in activities where there's risks. We just can't avoid it. It's hardwired into our brains to want to take a risk. And there's a lot of good reasons for that, the least of which is something called dopamine. And what it really means is we're all junkies. We love the high. Dopamine plays a major role in the way our brain handles rewards. When we get a reward, we get dopamine. We get a jolt of dopamine. And every type of reward that's been studied has shown an increase in dopamine transmission in the brain. And a lot of the addictive drugs out there, they act directly on this dopamine center in your brain. So we are hardwired, our brains, our chemicals, like rewards. And that causes us to want more of these things because we kind of get addicted to this stuff. So when you start thinking about how we propose to do incentive programs and how we get people engaged in a program, this whole idea of gamification and using unplanned for and surprise awards has a lot of effect on the way we think. They did a study, and this was done back in 2003. I picked it up on the science, one of the science papers that I read. And they talked about uncertainty and how that dopamine was shot off in our brain. And it was kind of interesting because what they did is they said, look, what if we told you 100% of the time you're going to get a reward? What happens inside of our brain? What happens with that dopamine? Well, what they measured was they said, as soon as you tell me that I'm going to get a reward, I get a big boost of dopamine, and then it drops off and it goes flat. So when they tell you they get the reward, you get a big boost of dopamine, and then you do the behaviors, and then you get the reward. Nothing happens at that end because we've already kind of known we're going to get it. The reward actually occurred when we were told we were going to get the reward. So then they said, well, what if we told everybody there's no chance of getting a reward and then gave them one? What would happen? Well, of course, as you would expect, if I tell you that you're not going to get something, and then you do, well, when you get the reward, that's a surprise to you. See, the dopamine goes up again in your brain. Now, here's where it gets kind of interesting. They took that same group of people and they said, basically, what if we told you, we're not sure if you're going to, you got about a 50-50 chance of getting this reward. We don't know. And when they ran that experiment, boom, they get the big shot of dopamine at the beginning, just like if they told you you were going to get it 100% of the time, and you get the big shot of dopamine at the end when the reward actually comes. So in effect, you're boosting that amount of dopamine in somebody's brain, which just really kind of jolts you into, I need more of this. So you're hitting them twice when you tell them you don't know for sure what you're going to get. Now, there's a lot of theories about why this might occur. One of the big ones is that, that from a evolutionary psychology standpoint, they talk about the early humans needed to hunt. And when you take risks hunting, you're more likely to be successful. So therefore, this is going to get the species to continue, so that we're kind of self-selecting for people who like to take risks. So just think about it. You got to go to new places to find prey. You got to try new techniques. You got to try everything's new. And food meant survival. And I'm also guessing that hunters that brought back the food were a little bit more considered hot by the opposite sex. So that, again, propagated that risk-taking behavior into the environment. So we are kind of hardwired for this. And it's kind of interesting because this plays a role in something called behavioral economics, which is really hot right now. And one of the guys that I read a lot is Dan Ariely, and he's written a lot of the books. A couple of them are Predictably Irrational, The Upside of Irrational. And they're must-reads, I personally believe, if you're going to have any kind of input into how you design an incentive and how you design influence programs in an organization, you should understand how the human brain works, and he does a great job of explaining it. But, behavioral economics, what they study in all of this is the effects of how we make decisions socially, cognitively, and all of that. But it's always talking about, usually in economics we talk about the rationality of our decisions, but with behavioral economics we're talking about the irrational part of our, and he wrote a recent book called The Honest Truth About Dishonesty. Remember that vending machine I talked about? Well, here's another vending machine gig that he put together where he said, we are going to offer some slots at a 30% discount. So instead of $1, they're 70 cents. And other slots they labeled, you have a 70% chance of paying $1 or a 30% chance of paying nothing. Now, if you think about that mathematically, that works out over time to be exactly the same amount, because if, you're basically getting a 30% discount if you keep playing and buying from that machine. But what's really interesting about this is that people move toward the 30% chance. So they actually showed that they had 300% higher sales when they priced everything probabilistically. People took the risk. They wanted to buy when they saw that option to do that. So right off the bat, this whole idea that we are rational beings is kind of off the mark. And when we think about the way incentives have been designed in the past, most of the time they're done incorrectly because they're done based on this idea that we are rational in how we approach this. And let me give you an example. We tell people, sell 100 units and get 100 units, or earn 1 point for every unit over goal, or the top 10% get a trip to Billings, Montana in February. 10 points for every sales call. It's very specific. Do this, get that. And it's really kind of boring. And in fact, there's one whole motivational theory called the expectancy theory by Victor Vroom. And you got to love a guy's name that's Vroom when he's talking about motivation. But his whole theory was, do I think the effort is worth the reward, and do I think do I want that reward, and do I think I will get that reward? So his whole theory was based on absolutes, and there's a lot of incentive planners out there that go by this as this is what we need to do to design the incentive program. But everything in that application is fixed, and as we just saw, we don't like fixed. We get bored with fixed. We like the excitement of having things that challenge us mentally and give us that dopamine shot. So in general terms, what we want to do is get more people feeling better about the programs that they run. So what we want to do is design the programs so they have more of the variable part of that equation, where they have more dopamine going into your participants' heads. So we first of all want to design these correctly. And what you want to do is start targeting your particular need. What is the things you want to do? And then talk about your company's culture and the history that you've done in your company. Because truthfully, I wouldn't suggest to anybody that we go from today doing a very specific, targeted incentive and then immediately go into some sort of variable reward structure. It just doesn't work that well. It would just be a shock to the system, so to speak. So what we want to do is make sure we take into account your culture, your history, and we want to make sure that we look at combining both quantifiable and qualifiable objectives in these programs. And finally, you want to make sure that we do take advantage of the human need for risk. In other words, we want to put into our programs something that actually drives that dopamine burst, and not just the one time, but the beginning, the middle, and the end. And I think what's interesting about this, it's a very simple concept. It's a very singular thing. In other words, do variable reinforcement and you will get a better return. We often ignore it because I think we think that we're rational, and we're not. And I think what I'm going to do now is hand it off to Tyler, and then Tyler's going to walk through kind of their formula and how they go about putting together these variable incentives, and give us some case histories with some results. And I think it's important to see that. So, Tyler, why don't you go ahead and take it away?
Perfect. Well, thank you so much. Very well done. And that's, I really enjoyed hearing that. It's always good to kind of be reinforced for something we believed in and been doing for a long time. And what I'm going to do is I will get to and show you some case studies of how this, a variable incentive equation or variable incentives were used. But before I do that, I want to walk you through kind of what the equation is in our particular case. Now, keeping in mind that you can tweak this equation. There's tons of different variables that come into play and different ways to do it. And I'll give you a few examples, but this is just how we do it, and we have a system that can manage it, so we're in a position that allows us to do kind of it in a semi-unique way. But you can take this equation and really plug in any type of program into it relatively easy. So the first part of the equation, obviously, is that the employee or the participant needs to achieve. They need to do something worthy of recognition, worthy of reward, something worth while, worth extra from the company. And there's two main categories, and Paul touched on this briefly, but there's what would be called subjective, which is something that is determined, the qualification of the achievement is determined by another individual, at the discretion of a manager, at the discretion of a coworker. So there's some sort of a human element in the play that determines, yes, this is worthy of recognition. Things like that would be demonstrating teamwork, going above and beyond, demonstrating proactivity, demonstrating company core values. So, taking the time to help, going above and beyond to help a client. So these are something you really can't clearly quantify with data. It has to be kind of something that's seen by another individual and someone that individual says this is worthy of recognition. So that's what is called subjective. So your program could be made up of subjective or it could be made up of objective or the combination of both. Objective is something that is a predefined, measurable activity. Something that is quantifiable, black or white. It either happens or it doesn't happen. Very often it's metric driven, something driven by statistics. For example, perfect attendance for the week. You get it or you don't. There's really no room for discretion there. Did you meet or exceed your weekly sales goal? You did or you didn't. 1 year of service. You got the 1 year valued service or you didn't. There's very rarely room for any discretion here. It's something that is a predefined activity or goal and something that is can be clearly proven as happening or not happening. So, you need to determine, it's going to determine, your organization is going to determine, what do you want to focus on heavily. I would say that the majority of the programs we work with do focus on the objective more than subjective, but that's not always the case. For example, our largest client, one of them, focuses almost solely on the subjective stuff. So it's really going to depend on your culture, and also when it comes to objectives, what is your capability of being able to quantify and measure certain things? Some companies have, organizations have measurement, processes in place that allow them to easily track these things. Others don't. There's some things that come into play and will help you determine that. So, one that gets touching really quickly on this before I move to the next one is that you also need to clearly communicate these things as part of a good incentive program. Tell them exactly what you're looking for out of them. Be as specific as you possibly can. So, here's where the variable starts coming into play. When they achieve these things, when when a recognition has been achieved, they are awarded a game opportunity. This is the opportunity to play a game. Okay, so this is the first point of recognition. You were saying, I am giving you, because you took the time to help a coworker, here's 5 game opportunities. Because you had perfect attendance for the week, here's 10 game opportunities. Because you have 1 year value service, here's 150 game opportunities. That's a big one. Let them know exactly. This is where it comes in. This is positive reinforcement now, starting to really getting coming into play here. Let them know exactly why you're rewarding them, and you want to give them the game opportunity as quickly as possible from the time it happens. So don't make them, if they achieve help a coworker today, don't say in 7 days from now, oh, you helped the coworker last week. Give them the recognition or the opportunity to play the game, or at least tell them they have the opportunity to play the game. They've earned it. Give them that as soon as possible after the actual event comes into play. So there's a direct relationship between the positive reinforcement and what they did to warrant that. And I can't stress enough that these have to be earned in some fashion. So you're earning the opportunity to play a game, and then with that game opportunity, you're, of course, playing a game that yields points, in this example. Now, your game doesn't have to yield points. Maybe your game can yield prizes, but you have to earn it to play the game. And when you get to the gaming aspect of it, the game should not be skill-based. The skill already happened in the previous step. The skill was in earning the opportunity to play the game. You did something that earned it. That's where the skill in the big gamification equation comes into play. People say, well, you're giving them, this based on luck. Well, it's not based on luck because you have to earn the right to play it. The games, in this case, are random, but they do yield a positive average. So they are earning the opportunity to play a quick video game that yields a positive average, but it's still a random event. It's unpredictable. It's intermittent. Sometimes it's going to yield 2. Other times it may yield as high as 5,000. On average, it yields 10 points of play. But within the individual play is independent of the previous or following play, so you never know what's going to happen with each individual play. This is where the dopamine comes into place. I've earned the opportunity to play a game. I now get to drop a fishing line into a lake and see what happens. I now get to do a scratch card and see what happens. One thing to note here also is that you don't want them to, when they've earned the reward of the game, you don't want them to be able to kind of lose that, at least in this equation. You may, again, that's a variable that could be tweaked. If you wanted to have them, risk, that's when you're really getting into some high risk where they've done something, they've won the points, and now they've lost the points. We don't like to take away. So I want to stress again that you're earning the opportunity, and then you're earning the opportunity to play a random game. The game yields a random amount, and in this case, it's points. I've seen examples where the game was reaching into a grab bag and pulling out dollar bills. They had $1 bills, $5 bills, $10 bills, 20, 50, and even 100 in there, and that was the game. I've seen games where they hand them physical scratch cards. That there's a company out there that does that makes scratch cards for programs that they hand out, and the odds are kind of set in those. I've seen spin the wheel where there's a prize in each section. They're 10-minute breaks, soda machine or vending machine tokens. So it doesn't have to be a point-based program. This example it is. So when they play the game yields a random number of points. They then take those points and they redeem them for a reward. Again, this is done online in the examples I'm going to show you. You want to give them a choice of rewards. You want to give them a quick delivery time. They can get a $20 debit card for 2,000 points, $50 gift card, 5,000 points, half-day paid time off for 9,000 points. You can see. And you can specialize. There's our company obviously fulfills rewards, but you can also do your own things and have fun rewards as well. You don't have to go through a company to do that. So this is the basic equation. You earn, you achieve, you earn the opportunity yields a random unpredictable number of points, and then the points are redeemed for a reward. So there's actually three levels of excitement here. One is earning the opportunity. Dang, that's exciting, I've earned it. 2 is playing the game. That's exciting. And the 3rd is, hey, I'm using my points now to get something. That's exciting. So in this equation, there's actually 3 points of excitement and 3 points of reinforcement. So with that being said, and of course I'd be happy to answer any questions. You can submit them via your GoToWebinar panel about this equation. But with that being said, let me touch on 3 quick case histories that actually use this equation and give you some examples of how the equation was used and the results of that. The first one will be one that focused on specific quantifiable measurable objectives. And the second would be one that was more subjective or qualifiable recognition. And the third was one that incorporated both. So going back to what I said earlier about the subjective and objective, number 1 is objective, number 2 is subjective, and number 3 is a combination of both. So the first one was a restaurant. And they were trying to promote high profit margin items in the restaurant. In this case, it was actually cinnamon rolls and freshly squeezed orange juice. They really had problems previously, or were limited results in the previous incentive efforts in engaging, keeping the wait staff actively engaged in the program, and they were really unable to quantify any improvement in sales. So they were looking for a program that would provide them, quantifiable evidence, and in order to do that, they had to, again, engage the employees, and it needed to be something that was easy to use, manage, and administer. You don't want to have something that is complicated and takes a long time to administer, so that was also a goal for them as well. So what they did is that, like I said, there were cinnamon rolls and orange juice. It's a pretty targeted program in this case, and participating wait staff rewarded with the virtual game tokens, and in this case, the game token represents an opportunity to play a game. 1 game token, i.e. opportunity for selling a small or large glass, a leader carafe, 6 game tokens, cinnamon roll, 10 game tokens, etc. So they used the game tokens to play any games online, and again, like I kind of touched on this earlier, each game yielded an average of 10 points, worth a penny each. And the average is important because that's how you budget from a company standpoint, administrative standpoint. If you're doing a variable reinforcement, you can't leave it 100% up to chance and say, I could break my budget tomorrow. You need to know from a mathematical, statistical standpoint that if I gave away 1,000 opportunities, that the result is going to be, give or take, right around 10,000 points because there's a mathematical average in there that will be adhered to. So again, it could be $50 was the highest it could happen. Now that was, I guess, quote unquote, the jackpot. And it's not like the lottery odds that Paul spoke of. This is something that does happen. in a company of 100 people, it probably happens once or twice a month. So it's something that is attainable. It's realistic. It's not something that's, hey, this is never going to happen to me. It's something that is somewhat attainable. And so it keeps each opportunity exciting because they know that getting to 5,000 points is somewhat attainable, or getting them, a semi-high outcome. Again, the points could not be accumulated, or they could not be lost or replayed. So once you played the game and won the points, you couldn't risk the points. The only way the points were, I guess, lost is if you spent them on a reward. And the only way you could earn or play the game was by earning it. So you can't buy more plays or somehow leverage your winnings into more plays like Las Vegas. They want you to keep putting your winnings back in until they're gone. This equation is the opposite of that. You can only play the game by earning the opportunity to do so. The results? They increased OJ sales by 19.6%. They increased cinnamon rolls by 23.5%, and an increase in employee engagement by 90% of all employees. They calculate log into their Snowfly account once a week. One time a month, I'm sorry. And overall, at the end of the day, after all their budget was spent, they realized 66% return on their total incentive expenditures. So for every dollar they spent on the program, they got the dollar back plus 66 cents more. So a very successful program in that regard. So next is the Health Solutions Company, about 4,500 employees. And their program focuses almost solely on peer-to-peer recognition. So one employee recognizing another employee for demonstrating behaviors associated with the company's mission and values. So this is subjective. There are guidelines, but you can't clearly quantify whether or not someone did something. That kind of has to be determined at the discretion of another person. So what their main goal was to really create a culture of recognition, which was to increase employee satisfaction, and they know and they believe, and they have the results to show that if they can do this, that their overall retention and performance will be good as well. So that's really where they're starting here, is really, again, to drive employee satisfaction, which would result in a lot of positive byproducts. So via the Snowfly portal or via this web-based portal, they would nominate each other electronically for recognition. Upon approval of the nomination, they would get the game tokens or the game opportunities to play the random point yielding game. And again, like the previous program, each play yielded an average of 10 points with a minimum of 2 and a maximum of 5,000. So here are the results in this example. We did what's called a chi-squared analysis and found that for those who did not participate in the program at this organization, that group was 3 times more likely to fall into what was deemed as a low satisfaction score, or at least they actually had pretty good overall overall job satisfaction. But when you broke it out into equal parts, there was a lower third, a middle third, and a higher third. The lower third of the population, these employees who did not participate were 3 times more likely to fall in that. Whereas those who were engaged and did participate were 1.6 times more likely to be in the top level of employee satisfaction. So what you're seeing is, pretty straightforward. If they didn't participate, if you took that group of people, took a random sample from that group, they were 3 times more likely to fall into the low category. If you took a random sample from the high group, they were 1.6 times more likely to fall into the high level of satisfaction. Paul, this is a slide you made. Would you mind touching on this about, the implications of employee satisfaction?
Yeah, what we wanted to kind of cover here with the group is when we talk about this whole idea of engagement and satisfaction and connecting that to the company, I think sometimes people look at this as almost a soft measure. Okay, that's nice. Well, Sears actually went out and did a very deep study a few years back to find out what does satisfaction and engagement really mean in the organization. And so what they started measuring their employee satisfaction results. And what they saw is, and they had a scale of, like 1 to 10 or whatever it was on what their employee satisfaction is. And they could show that an increase in employee satisfaction of 1 unit, and, if they were 1 to 10, that would be going from like a 7 to an 8, resulted in a 5% increase in revenue growth. So they could actually pinpoint what that movement actually made for them in money. And in general terms, we've shown that satisfaction reduces employee turnover. And with the cost of I did a quick Google out there and found out that that employee turnover can be as low as $3,500 or to 150% of the employee's annual salary. So these are numbers that HR and other people in the organization should be paying attention to, because if I can impact that engagement score, if I can impact that satisfaction by running these types of programs where I get people in the program, I'm going to actually increase my revenue without having the same amount of increase in cost. So when we talk about the results, Tyler, that you went through with the program, getting people engaged, it's not the idea of just running a program. There's a million programs out there at a million companies where they give away a clock or a watch every 5 years or some crystal bowl, and those are nice, but they don't get people engaged. And using these variable reinforcement techniques, you actually get people engaged in the program, which drives higher satisfaction and engagement with the company. So that was just to kind of show that revenue is actually connected to this type of discussion, and it's not just a nice thing, and it's not just HR being a good person or a company being caring so much as this is, hey, there's some business reasons to do this stuff.
Excellent. Thank you. So the third is a call center, the third case study, and this incorporated both subjective and objective. There was quantifiable performance objectives and also discretionary recognition from managers and coworkers and peer-to-peer. So again, they were going after quantifiable goals and subjective elements of the performance. So here's some of the objective performance metrics. They had a loyalty program. They were trying to get callers, people calling to make a reservation enrolled in. They also were rewarding their employees simply for transferring callers to a credit card partner. And that's something I like to touch on this, because did the partner ever get a credit card? Well, you know what? They don't even. I can't say they don't know that, but they didn't reward on that. They rewarded only for all you had to do is transfer them over there, because that's what is it's a numbers game. In this case, it's a preceding behavior. The more you can transfer, the more you're going to get. So we call that rewarding the homework and not just the final grade. Call quality was another one. Call compliancy. If you guys are in the call center industry, these make sense to you. Team leaders, supervisors were giving out rewards for when they did individual call monitors, adherence to schedule. They would do fun trivia questions and do their own promotions. They did happy birthdays, and again, error-free calls when it came to call monitors. So the team leaders had the power to recognize different things. These weren't concrete parts of the program as a whole. They were just kind of what the team leader decided were important to them, and what their team needed to focus on. And then, of course, they had a peer-to-peer recognition feature as well, which allowed one employee to recognize another employee, similar to the program I just discussed for company core values, etc. They had a testing. You could even do a variable equation in testing, whereas you would reward employees tokens or options for taking a quiz. They use the system for solicitation of suggestions. Again, rewarding the tokens. Special contests periodically on what maybe seasonal promotions. They used the system to manage as well. The key with one focus in this is something you all should try to do with any incentive program, is see if you can create one consistent methodology. In this case, the consistent methodology was the variable reinforcement equation I spoke of. They were always changing the goals and objectives that drove the equation, but the methodology was the same. So whether or not you go with a variable equation or a point-based equation, try to keep the methodology similar across the program and indefinite. Never change it. If you can avoid changing it, do. Because it just makes the program easier to follow and easier to get people engaged, because they know how to do it. Maybe the objectives and the goals change, but how they get rewarded and how they receive the reinforcement remains consistent.
If I could jump in there, Tyler, that's
Sure.
a really important point, because I think sometimes people think changing the game up a lot actually gets people more engaged because it's new and different. But the problem you run into there is people have to go down a learning curve in any program you run. And if you're changing the way, like you say, the method, then they have to relearn every time. we can change objectives. We can change levels and goals and behavior criteria. But if the process is similar each time, people actually get used to that behavior, and they're just now focusing on that variable and intermittent reinforcement. So it actually helps you to not change it up too much, because you've got the change equation handled in the variable reinforcement.
Right.
The reason you have to change up a lot of the other types of programs is because nothing does change in those programs. They're exactly the same.
Mm-hmm.
They get boring. Here you don't run into that, so you can keep that methodology the same. The people come down the learning curve, and then they don't have to worry about that again in the future. So that, I think that's a very important point.
Right, and it's a good model for us to have because, hey, we set them up on the methodology, and they can always change, the variables within the methodology, but the methodology remains consistent. So it's, we have clients that are with us indefinitely, which is because of that. They're able to change it up.
Right.
So. This right here, I'm going to focus on this slide, the result. This is a good way to measure ROI, a universal way to measure ROI, the way this particular graph works. This takes the percentage of eligible participants that in their case had very good weekly quality scores. And you can do this equation or this methodology for ROI is when you set up an incentive program, be sure that historically you look at the percentage of the eligible workforce that are at a specific level of quote-unquote desired performance. So in this case, they had, looks like anywhere from 20 to 15% prior to the program were at what they considered very good weekly quality scores. And you can see that went up. But you can plug this equation and, this ROI equation into any type of incentive effort. If you're doing attendance, well, what percentage of your workforce right now has weekly perfect, good weekly perfect attendance? Is it 10? Is it 20? And then you want to compare before and after. That's a good way that, that's not going to require a lot of, detailed rocket science calculations to figure out your ROI. And conversely, when you're setting up a program, if you look into the goal you're targeting and you see that without incentives, 85 or 90% are at a desired level, then it might be time to ask you, is this objective worth giving an incentive for? Because you already have people where you want them to be without incentives, so you might be better off taking that budget and targeting it towards another area. But so I use that, this kind of little off subject, but that's a good way. This graph illustrates a good way to measure ROI, which again is percentage of employees at a level compared to before and after. Loyalty club enrollments, this is the percentage above baseline of the number of enrollments. You can see that also went up, and the percentage above baseline in credit card transfers. So I don't need to know that. I guarantee you the number of people that signed up for credit cards went up proportionally to this because they were transferring more people over. So, and the implications were in this final study, again, focusing on the method. I talked a little bit about the methodology of the, remaining consistent, as well as the being able to get all aspects, from the end user employee all the way to corporate involved in the program in terms of representing their goals and flexibility. So with that, Paul, anything you want to touch on, in summary, what I spoke of, or kind of what you've talked of as well?
I think you've shown through the case histories that this can have a huge impact, and I like how you've been able to show that this is not just a one-trick pony kind of thing. It can be applied to a variety of different industries, different areas in the company. I think one of the things, and I tweeted this out, was, and we didn't really touch on, but there's so much talk about generational differences today. And the reality is, because we're talking about something human, we're not talking about something whether it's a 20-year-old or a 50-year-old. We're talking about the fact that we're tapping into a human situation. So this applies across all generations. So we don't have to get into this whole discussion, is this generationally specific and relevant? It's human relevant, number one. And I think we just need to focus in on this, that this applies across levels in an organization, from entry level to executives. Truthfully, I think I've read in the past that a lot of the top level executives in companies have a higher propensity for risk, and that's how they got there. So this would even turn on your to a great degree. But anyway, I think to summarize all of that, variable rewards are innate. It's something deep in our brain, and we crave those surprises. And we can make these more effective if we take advantage of those ingrained behaviors. And I think we approach this, in a lot of cases, very logically, and we try to set up programs where it's if-then, and away we go. And we could just really turn that dial up to 11, so to speak, if we can get into the more, as I say here, probabilistic payouts, where I'm taking a risk in some cases. And that creating that common platform allows you to keep the methodology similar, but increases the effectiveness of your spend by making it easily learned. And as you can see, some of the times we're talking about a 4-time increase in the impact of the reward program. So I think all of that just goes back to the fact that, just because we've done something for a lot of years a certain way doesn't mean it's always the right way. And I think there's a lot we can learn from this idea of variable reinforcement. And I think, one of the things that, I saw one of the questions, I don't know if we want to jump to the next slide, Tyler, but because I think that's just, kind of giving everybody the caveats. This is the things that you should pay attention to. The key to the success is that you have to keep your payouts and award values in line with what you're asking people to do. If you overpay, you're going to drive ridiculous behaviors. Wall Street's a great example of that. If you throw too much money at a problem, you're going to change behaviors in a way you don't want. So you have to understand that connection. You need to, have some experience with the various programs and structures, because otherwise you can do more damage than good. And again, I think the biggest thing is inexperienced designers can use the mathematics here and actually hurt yourself by having a program that rewards too much to too many people or not enough to too few. So I think those would be the caveats that I would put out there. I don't know if you've had anything from your experience, Tyler, that you would want to throw out there for people to just watch out for.
Yeah. I mean, I think, there's just a few key things. I touched on a couple of them. That you should consider when designing a program, not just a variable program, an native program. And the key is, make it, like you said, setting your goals in a way that, again, is driving what you want to drive, making sure that the thresholds are at a level that isn't being achieved already. And in terms of the variable equation, again, I can't stress enough is making sure that although it's variable, you need to have the opportunity tied to something of value to the organization. So that's really where the tie-in is. To them earning the opportunity should be something. They're doing something that's worthwhile to the organization.
Well, and I think that leads to our next slide, Tyler.